for consecration. Happy World Day of Consecrated Life! Good afternoon, sisters and brothers. I am Father Angel Cortez of the Order of Friars Minor and Co-Executive Secretary of the Association of Major Religious Superiors in the Philippines. And welcome to our online conference entitled QUO VADIS, Lights, Shadows, and New Frontiers for Consecrated Men and Women in the Philippines. Of course, I am joined here by my partner, kapatid.
Yes, good afternoon, kapatid, and good afternoon to all our sisters and brothers joining us on Facebook Live, on YouTube, and Zoom. I am Sister Happy Montesilia of the Daughters of St. Anne, also the Co-Executive Secretary of AMRSP. Of course, as we celebrate this year, not only the 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines, but also the 50 years of AMRSP. We are all challenged to discern God's call for consecrated life in the Philippines.
That's right, sister. That's why this afternoon is both informational and reflective. We hope that as consecrated men and women, we can all together reflect on the joys and hopes, the lights and shadows of our consecrated life. And now, to introduce our keynote speaker, kapatid.
Yes, thank you, Father Angel. Our keynote speaker is a Bicolano born in Daet, Camarines Norte on January 26, 1968. Belated happy birthday po, Father. He entered the Order of Preachers, or the Dominicans, and made his first religious profession on May 13, 1989, and was ordained priest on May 14, 1995. He became the Prior Provincial of the Dominican Philippine Province from 2012 to 2016. And during his time as Prior Provincial, he served as Vice Chair of the AMRSP from 2013 to 2015, and Interim Co-Chair from 2015 to 2016. He was asked to serve Socius of the Master of the Order for Asia and the Pacific from 2016 to 2019. And on July 13, 2019, he was elected as the 88th Master or Superior General of the Order of Preachers to serve from 2019 to 2028.
And so, sisters and brothers, let us all welcome direct from the convent of Santa Sabina in Rome, Italy, the Most Reverend Father GERARD Francisco TIMONER III, OP, Master of the Order of Preachers.
Brothers and sisters, kumusta po kayo? I wish to greet you all on this World Day of Consecrated Life, and we thank the Lord for this gift, for this grace to be together, even though by virtual means only. I wish to thank Brother Angel Cortez and Sister Happy Montesilio, our Executive Secretaries, for inviting me to be with you on this webinar. I wish also to greet in a special way the co-chairpersons of the AMRSP, Sister Marilyn Hava and Brother Shelo Almasan. Since we are celebrating the 500 years, the Jubilee of the first Eucharist celebrated in our country and the first baptism, I thought of going back to the apostolic letter of Pope Francis that was addressed to all consecrated people during the International Year of Consecrated Life. And in that letter, Pope Francis is inviting us to look at the present with gratitude. And I think that is very appropriate because we are celebrating 500 years of the first Eucharist and baptism in our country. Second, the Holy Father invites us in that same letter to live the present with passion. And third, the Holy Father invites us to embrace the future with hope. I'm very happy with the logo that is used for the celebration of the 5th centenary of the first Eucharist celebrated in the country. Gifted to give. We have received the faith, and after 500 years, we are ready to give the same gift. That is why it is interesting that after 500 years, the Cardinal Prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, the Congregation of the Holy See that is in charge for the preaching of the gospel to all nations, is headed by a Filipino, His Eminence, Luis Antonio Cardinal Tagle. So after 500 years, it is as though Filipinos are ready, really, to give back the gift that we have received. And it echoes very well what the Lord tells us in the gospel. The gift that you have received, give as a gift. And we are doing that. It's also interesting that we have received the faith through the Spanish missionaries. And today, the apostolic nuncio to Spain is a Filipino, Most Reverend Bernardito Ausa. I was telling my Spanish converts in Madrid last year that it is like everything has come to a full circle. We have received the faith from our Spanish missionaries, and now the delegate of the Holy Father to Spain is a Filipino. We really have a lot of reasons to thank the Lord for the gift of faith that we have received. And throughout the years, not just this year, we have been giving back and sharing that same faith that we have received. That is why it is only appropriate to thank the Lord for this gift that we have received. From the letter of to the Philippians, we read, I thank my God each time I think of you. And when I pray for you, I pray with joy. The Germans say, denken ist danken. To think is to thank. And according to the letter of Paul to the Philippians, and to pray. And that is true. There is only one letter difference between thinking and thanking. Because when we think of the blessings the Lord has given us, we cannot but be thankful. And it's also important for us religious to realize that our desire to dedicate our lives to the service of God and to the church, to the service of our brothers and sisters, is prompted by a desire to express our gratitude by giving back what we have received, the faith and all the many blessings and graces that we have received. The mystic Meister Eckhart said, if the only prayer you said in your whole life was thank you, that would suffice. Imagine that. If the only prayer that we could utter in our lives is thank you, that is enough. It doesn't mean, of course, that we go to the chapel, just say to the Lord, Lord, thank you, and that is enough. No. Meister Eckhart is telling us that in fact our entire prayer and our entire life should be a prayer and a life of gratitude, because we have received everything from the Lord. And the sacrament that we are receiving, the 5th centenary, is actually a sacrament of thanksgiving, the Eucharist, because it is the greatest gift that we have received from the Lord, the gift of God's very self. And of course, a writer said, saying thank you is more than good manners. It is good spirituality. And on this year that we are celebrating this Jubilee, we should always be thankful, because we realize that everything that we have received truly comes from the Lord. And so, the first part, to look at the past with gratitude. As we look at the past, we thank the Lord for sending us our brothers and our sisters who were sent to our country to preach the gospel, to evangelize the people. Of course, first came the Augustinians in 1565. I used here the icon of St. Augustine, even if St. Augustine did not really found the Augustinians and the Recoletos. But of course, these orders are really inspired by St. Augustine. And after the Augustinians came our brother Franciscans in 1578. And in 1581, the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, came to the Philippines. And we are the latecomers, no? The Dominicans. We are the fourth ones who arrived in 1587. And after that, the Recoletos, another order inspired by St. Augustine, came in the year 1606. So as we look at the past, we thank the Lord for these converts who really traveled a very long way just to reach our shores. And to look at the past with gratitude, I would like to share with you what I believe are timeless lessons from the old evangelization, lessons that are timeless and therefore timely, in the sense that these are the very same lessons that I think we should reflect upon as we face, this need of the world for a new evangelization. This list is by no means exhaustive, and I hope you will pardon me for the limitation of my perspective. I am looking at this from the perspective of who I am, and that is a Dominican brother, a Dominican friar. So what are these timeless lessons? At least there are 5 for me. Number 1 is zeal for the mission. Second, it is interesting that we find the collaboration among the religious during these times. Third, learning from the people to evangelize the people. And this was a strategy that was used by the first missionaries. Fourth, compassion and mercy, justice and peace. And the last one, preaching in community. And so we take a look at this under the first invitation of the Holy Father to look at the past with gratitude. As I said, I will be looking at this from the perspective of who I am, and therefore it is very limited. Zeal for the mission. The Dominicans came in 1587, but in 1586, there was this letter of Fray Juan Crisostomo, a letter to prospective missionaries. And it is interesting that part of that recruitment letter says, and it really minces no words, it talks about the reality itself, a reality that he must have heard from the Augustinians, from the Franciscans, and the Augustinians, and from the early Dominicans who tried to go but died along the way. And then he says this in this recruitment letter: in the first place, the voyage is difficult. One has to go through many hardships. The food and drinks rot. The ship gets dirty and stinking. Imagine that if you have a vocation poster that says that, come join our congregation, we serve rotten food and drinks. And our convent, it is really dirty and stinking. I really wonder if you will get candidates or people who will be interested to join the congregation. They will be turned off. But this invitation letter attracted men who have heroic desires, who are on fire with a zeal for the mission. Just imagine, they traveled from Spain, crossed the Atlantic, and there are no airplanes. They crossed the Atlantic, and when they reach the Americas, what we now call today, for instance, that part called Mexico, they traveled by land from the Atlantic side to the Pacific side. And once they get to the Pacific side, they cross the Pacific until they reach the Philippines. So imagine that. People who will be attracted to do that are people who are really fired by the Holy Spirit to proclaim the gospel, who are not worried that they might not even reach their destination, because many of their converts who went ahead of them died crossing the Atlantic, some died crossing the Americas, and the others died crossing the Pacific. So, zeal for the mission. The second one is collaboration among the religious. My converts in the Philippines are, of course, preparing this seminar, Barkada, the Legacy of the Order of Preachers in the Philippines. And of course, they're using the word Barkada, which I will try to explain later on, at least for those of you who do not know it yet. It's interesting that when the Dominicans came, we are the fourth ones who arrived. We stayed with a bishop for a time, and then we were hosted by the Franciscans. And it is in the Franciscan convent that the friars were sent to the various missions in the Philippines or in Luzon. So we are grateful to our brother, the Franciscans, who hosted us. Another one is the first bishop of Manila was the Dominican Domingo de Salazar. He left Spain with Dominican converts, but his converts died. There was only one who was left. And so he crossed the Pacific with the Jesuits. My good friend, Father Tony Moreno, the former provincial of the Jesuits, was teasing me when we were talking about this, and he said, we the Jesuits took good care of your Dominican convert so that he would really arrive alive in Manila. And thanks to them, our brother Domingo de Salazar was able to exercise his ministry as the first bishop of Manila. So he arrived with 3 Jesuits. And the Jesuit group also lost members of the society as they traveled from Spain to the Philippines. So at that time, there was this collaboration. And we will see, of course, later on, the collaboration even in the publication of the first book that was printed in the Philippines. The next one is learning from the people to evangelize the people. This is very interesting because even before the terms inculturation or interculturation were invented centuries after, the missionaries already knew and were doing what we are talking about when we speak about interculturation. The recruitment letter by Fray Juan Crisostomo indicated study as integral to their pastoral program. I read also somewhere that the Augustinians, the Franciscans, and the Jesuits were instructed, you must learn the language of the people. And this is also part of the recruitment letter. Once assigned to different places, we must begin to learn the language, which is hard work. And with its knowledge, we shall catechize the unbelievers on the matters of our holy Catholic faith. And this pastoral program gave us the different dictionaries of the major languages in the Philippines: Tagalog, Ilocano, Bicolano, Cebuano, Visayan, Ilonggo, and the rest. Because the authors of the first dictionaries were the missionaries who were sent to these various regions. But it is interesting that the missionaries tried their best to listen to the voice of the people, and then they wrote the catechism and they wrote the different dictionaries. This is a simple pastoral program that gave us La Doctrina Cristiana, the first book printed in the Philippines of 1593 that is written in Latin, Spanish, and our very own native script, the Baybayin or Baybayin. How do we know that we have a native script? And the only extant, or at least the oldest extant record of that is La Doctrina Cristiana, which we find as part of the iconography of the second Filipino saint, San Pedro Calungsod. And this is how it looks, La Doctrina Cristiana. This is the cover. The replica of the printing press of La Doctrina can be found at the Museum of the University of Santo Tomas in Manila. So it says, Doctrina Cristiana en lengua española y tagala, corregida por los religiosos de las órdenes, empresa con licencia en San Gabriel de la Orden de Santo Domingo en Manila, 1593. So it was the Dominicans who printed this. That is why you find there the image of Saint Dominic. But the one who translated were not the Dominicans. The one who translated this were the Franciscans. It was Juan Plasencia who translated the Spanish text into Tagalog. And this is how it looks. First, it taught people how to pronounce the syllables, babe, bibo, bu. And then, the Pater Noster, Padre Nuestro, in the Roman script. And then you will find at the bottom, in Roman script, the Tagalog translation, which I believe is really advanced for its time. Or perhaps they are already doing what we are really supposed to be doing today. And let me read that. Ang Ama namin, nasa langit ka, ipasamba mo ang ngalan mo. That's very beautiful. The initiative comes from God, not from us. Ipasamba mo ang ngalan mo. And then, umuwi sa amin ang pagkahari mo. God's kingdom is not out there. God's kingdom is within. Umuwi sa amin ang pagkahari mo. God has made His dwelling with us. And our petition is for God, or for us to realize that God is truly Emmanuel, the one who dwells within us and among us. Umuwi sa amin ang pagkahari mo. Ipasunod mo ang loob mo dito sa lupa para sa langit. Bigyan mo kami ngayon. Hindi po ito tinapay. Bigyan mo kami ngayon ng aming kakanin para nang sa araw-araw. At kakanin, sige, kakanin is food. But it's also possible to say that this is kakanin, the different rice cakes that are available. Of course, the Eucharistic connection is lost, bread, but they're very realistic. Bigyan mo kami ng aming kakanin para nang sa araw-araw at pakawaling mo ang aming kasalanan, yaing winawalang bahala namin sa loob ang kasalanan ng nagkakasala sa amin. It's a very important lesson about forgiveness. Forgiveness is iwalang bahala. It is to shake off. It is to let go of the offenses, of the sins of those who committed offenses against us. And this one is my favorite. Huwag mo kaming iiwan nang di kami matalo ng tukso. That is very different from what we have today. At huwag mo kaming iadya, at huwag mo kaming ipahintulot sa tukso. Or the English, lead us not into temptation. That is really very different. Huwag mo kaming iiwan. nang di kami matalo ng tukso. Here in Italy, we are now using the Revised Translation of the Our Father, and instead of saying, lead us not into temptation, non ci indurre alla tentazione, we say, non abbandonarci. Exactly this one. Huwag mo kaming iiwan nang di kami matalo ng tukso. Datapwat iadya mo kami sa dilang masama. Amen, Jesus. And then what you see at the bottom is the same Ama namin, but written in our native script, in our baybayin. And the first missionaries learned this, and they wrote this. In other words, they have a big respect, a huge respect to the culture that they have found. They used the native script, something that I could not even read. Can you? Perhaps some of you can. So, let's see. So that is the Ama namin. And then it goes to the Dios te salve Maria, llena eres de gracia. So that is an example of how the missionaries listen to the voice of the people so that they can evangelize the people. So this is how it would look like when it is retranslated back to English. This is a translation of Professor Joe de Mesa. So it's very interesting, and he could not translate loob. And so he still used the word loob. So the missionaries tried to understand our concept of the person and the concept of loob. Another example of this is the sermon by a Franciscan, Fray Juan de Oliver, a sermon that was written around the years 1585 or 1590. I found this from a book by Dr. Florentino Ornedo, professor at both the Ateneo and the University of Santo Tomas many years ago. He passed on now. May he rest in peace. A very good professor, and this book was Pagmamahal and Pagmumura. And it is interesting that the sermon says this: ang tao may bait, may vasto, ibinubukod niya sa kanyang loob ang magaling sa masama. Minamahal niya ang mahal, at ang muray, minumura rin. Aba, napakaganda, no po? Ang kabaliktaran pala ng pagmamahal ay pagmumura. Mahal, mura. Pero sa atin ngayon, ang iniisip natin kapag sinasabi nating mura ay pagsasalita lang ng masama. Hindi po. Ang pagsasalita ng masama ay isang paraan ng pagmumura, pagpapababa ng halaga. Mahal ang bilihin, mura ang bilihin. Mataas ang halaga, mababa ang halaga. Kaya nga yung mga taong mura ng mura, pinapababa niya ang halaga ng taong minumura niya. Kaya nga nakakalungkot po sa atin kapag yung pagmumura mukhang nagiging ordinaryo na lang. Sa bagay, di ba? Kapag minumura mo ang isang tao, madali mo na ring patayin sapagkat pinababa mo na ang kanyang halaga. And this is an insight that many of us have already forgotten. But see, the missionaries, they listened to the expressions and to the language of the people. Mahal, mura. And then, Fray Juan de Oliver used it in his sermon. Ang taong may bait, may basto, minamahal niyang mahal, at ang muray minumura rin. Kumbaga, lalo ang Diyos at mahal sa lahat, ano't di ninyo mahalin at sintahing lalo sa lahat. Minumura pala ninyo ang Diyos. Take note, minumura pala ninyo ang Diyos. Tuwing sinasaksi ng gayong usap, ay abaalin pa ang salang totoo kundi yaon, gawang masama sa lahat at kamurahang dakila ng Panginoong Diyos na siya ay sinasaksi ng di totoo. Thus you make God cheap whenever you ask Him to witness to such talk. However, the real sin, a most evil deed, and a great insult to God would be to call on Him to bear witness to a lie. So, that is another proof how the first missionaries listened to the voice of the people. and they try their best to understand the culture and express the faith in that culture. Fourth, compassion and mercy, justice and peace. You know, our struggle for the restoration of justice so that we may obtain peace in our world is not something new. It was already happening during that era. One example of this is the first bishop, Domingo de Salazar, who was accused of siding with the natives, with the Indios, whom we now call today Filipinos. But in those days, the Filipinos was another name for another category. And then he says, as in his letter to the king, he regrets that many of the Spaniards were conquerors, conquistadores, but he said they are actually destroyers. And then he said, Your Majesty seems to hold me guilty for having encouraged the slaves to leave the Spaniards, but know, Your Highness, that you have declared them free. So Domingo de Salazar was really talking about, the abolition of slavery. Of course, the other side to that was the Spaniards were saying, we cannot have slaves. How come the natives can have their own alipins? But of course, that is another issue. That is another topic. Our alipin is not the same as the esclavos or the slaves that the Spaniards have. But it's important that in this letter, an evidence how the Bishop of Manila was actually fighting against slavery. And there is still a lot that you can find in that letter. You might want to go to Blair and Robertson, the Philippine Islands, the translation of all of these Spanish documents. I found this at the website of the Manila Cathedral, and you can see there, this topic on the First Synod of Manila that was called in 1582. And among the important decisions of that First Synod was the teaching of the Catechism in the native dialect. I would like to believe it's the native language, because Ilocano is not just a dialect, it is a language. Tagalog is not just a dialect, it's a language. Bicolano, Cebuano, and Ilonggo, they are languages. Waray, they are not dialects but languages. And then the Declaration of Human Rights of both native Christians and non-Christians. Declaration of Human Rights. Why? Because we should not forget that Bishop Salazar was a student of Francisco de Vitoria, a professor in Salamanca, who was in contact with the missionaries in Hispaniola, people like Bartolomé de las Casas, Antonio Montesinos, Pedro de Córdoba. These are the friars who were championing human rights. So it's no wonder that Domingo de Salazar knows this, because he was a student of Francisco de Vitoria. So let me just say something about Francisco de Vitoria. He did not go to the Philippines. He remained as professor in Salamanca. But at least just for us to, at least for those of us who do not know it yet, Vitoria, according to the UN Director General in Geneva, Michael Muller, he said, Victoria imagined a system of global governance anchored in universal rights, thoughts that would eventually lead to the United Nations and its Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's interesting that this big hall of the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, is called the Vitoria Hall, which you can see here. It is dedicated to the memory of Francisco de Vitoria, the professor of the first Bishop of Manila, Domingo de Salazar. And finally, preaching in community. Fray Crisostomo's invitation letter to prospective missionaries indicated we must preach, moreover, through our lifestyle, so that if our teaching of doctrine does not move hearts, our lives will move all those who see us. This is the best of teaching. Here I could hear an echo of a saying that is attributed to Saint Francis: preach at all times, and when necessary, you do it with words. In other words, the most effective way of preaching is by our lives. And I'm happy to note that the Dominicans who were sent to Pangasinan were not really welcomed by the natives in those days. And for 3 years, no one got converted. But after 3 years, this is part of the report of Duarte, the historian. One native chief approached one missionary one night and said, "I have observed you for 3 years. If one does not eat, neither do the others. If one prays at midnight, so do the rest. If one avoids women, so do the others. All follow one rule or path. All have patience and do us good. Thus I have determined to believe you, because I am persuaded that men of this manner do not lie." And if you are not lying, perhaps what you're saying about this Jesus is true. And later on, he asked for baptism. He was converted, not by the words of the friars, but by their lives. It's also good to note that the first Dominican community that arrived in 1587 was called a barcada. Even in history books, they list the names of the first barcada, the second barcada, the third barcada, and they are all called the barcadas because they arrived in a barca, in a boat. In a boat. Even in English, we call it the bark of Peter, for instance. And it is interesting that in our language today, ang tawag po natin sa mga magkakaibigang talaga namang magkakalapit ay barkada. Kabarkada. Di ba napakaganda na yung dating tawag sa mga magkakasama upang ipahayag ang kaharian ng Diyos, ang tawag sa kanila barkada, and this group of friends, what people saw was the friendship actually, and they used the same term to refer to friends, barkada. And I think that is an important realization for us religious, that our first apostolate is really to live in community. If we are to build the church, which is the bigger community, we should not forget that our very own community is a small church. If the family is a domestic church, the religious community is also a small church. And it is an apostolate to really live and build that community so that by our lives we could witness to the kingdom. So that is the first part. To remember the past with gratitude, I now turn to the second invitation, to live the present with passion. I just want to say that, and I would like to quote a confrere of mine, Timothy Radcliffe, who said, "There is a deep joy that belongs to our vocation as religious. This joy is deeply linked with sorrow, even with anger. Our vocation summons us to share not just the passion of Christ, but also His passions, His joy, His sorrow, and anger. And these are the passions of those who are alive with the gospel." In other words, one of the most important challenges that we face today as religious is the loss of passion. The loss of passion. I remember this story of a young religious who went to her mother superior asking for a sabbatical leave. And the young religious said, "Mother, I think I need a sabbatical." And the superior said, "Why, sister?" The young sister said, "I think I am getting burnt out." And the mother superior smiled at the young sister and said, "Dear sister, how can you be burnt out? You are not even lit. There is no fire in you. How can you be burnt out? Have fire, be on fire, and then come back and tell me that you are getting burnt out." The loss of passion is actually a big problem for us. And of course, the Holy Spirit who tells the church at Ephesus says in the book of Revelation, I know all about you, your works, your labor, your endurance, and you cannot tolerate the wicked. These are good things. I know too that you have patience and have suffered for my name without growing tired. But the Spirit has one complaint. Yet I hold this against you. You have lost the love you had at first. The love that we had at first. The loss of passion. And the new evangelization, according to the former secretary of the Pontifical Council for promoting the new evangelization, many years ago said, this new evangelization does not consist in proclaiming a new message, a new method, etc. It is in fact a question of returning to the first love mentioned to us in the book of Revelation when the church of Ephesus is reproached. So how do we recover that passion? In his encyclical letter, Fratelli e Sorelle Tutti, on fraternity, sorority, and social friendship, Pope Francis, before the publication of the letter, wrote in his own hand, look, in his own hand, of course in Spanish, but we received, and you have received the English translation, no? And he was inviting us to help him share the message of Fratelli e Sorelle Tutti. And of course, we recall the meeting of Saint Francis and the Sultan. And for us Dominicans, of course, this gift from the Franciscans, from Father Perry, we received this gift, Dominic and Francis, in fraternal embrace, Fratelli Tutti. And I know you have already studied it, but I would just like to recall that Pope Francis tells us, globalized society makes us neighbors, but it does not make us brothers and sisters. But of course, the Holy Father also knows that fraternity and sorority are not enough to solve the world's problems. Is it enough? Brotherhood, sisterhood, can it solve problems? We must not forget that the first murder in the scripture is not homicide, but fratricide. A brother killed his own brother. We should not also forget that the first recorded identity theft in the scriptures was committed by a brother. Jacob stole the birthright and identity of his brother Esau. And of course, who can forget that the first recorded human trafficking was in the scriptures, or at least as far as we know. There might be other records. Joseph was sold by his own brothers to merchants on the way to Egypt. Joseph was sold by his own family. So it seems that brotherhood is not enough to solve the world's problems. There might be other examples about the sisters too. And the sisters, you know how sisters can also betray you. So brotherhood and sisterhood are not enough to solve the world's problems. So Fratelli Tutti invites us to look at the Good Samaritan in the scriptures and the characters in the Good Samaritan. This is an icon from the Tese community of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus is at the center wearing white. And it is interesting because the Good Samaritan, the victim that is depicted in the story is wearing white, telling us that Jesus is the one who was the victim. So here on this figure, you will see the robbers and the victim they are attacking. They are an image, according to the Tese community, of a disfigured Trinity. Harmony broken by sin. Humanity, though created in the image of God, is no longer in His likeness. And then, of course, on the other side is the restoration of that image. You see the Good Samaritan with the victim, now restored, and the innkeeper sharing a meal with a cup at the center, evoking the image, the ancient image of the Trinity that is at the top. So Trinitarian harmony has been re-established. So the Good Samaritan tells us that a piety that forgets one's neighbor, like that of the priest and the Levite, is only a form of idolatry, a worship that is empty. Love, the work of charity accomplished by the Good Samaritan, restores humanity to the likeness of God. So, in all the images, Christ is presented as the one who is present in the wounded person who needs our help. Here I would like to quote our brother Thomas Aquinas, who said, "Mercy is heartfelt sympathy for another's distress, affective mercy." When we see somebody suffering, we feel their pain and we are moved by what we see. That is affective mercy. It is something that affects us. But it should not stop there. It should impel us to help him if we can. Effective mercy. And I think that is the challenge for us religious, that our affective mercy may become effective mercy. There is something I forgot with Fratelli Tutti. During the meeting of the USG, the Union of Superiors General last year, during a virtual meeting like this one of the superiors said, perhaps we should begin, from now on, we should not call ourselves fathers, but we should call ourselves brothers. One of the mendicant orders, the mendicants are the Franciscans, the Augustinians, the Carmelites, there are others, I'm sorry, I forgot, and the Dominicans. And one of the mendicants said, not me, but one of them said, but we are already brothers. Our problem is we have forgotten that we are friars. So I think that is also the challenge for the male religious. That before, the distinction of our being ordained, we are first religious. We are brothers. We are confreres to one another. And I think we need to recover that. And that's really strange because in reality, our official title is brother. For the mendicants, they know this. In the official assignations that they write, they sign as brother, not as father, but brother. And finally, to embrace the future with hope. We all remember that trilogy of papal teachings on the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. Here I would like to recall this encyclical on hope. For in hope we are saved. Spes salvi. Of course, we remember St. Paul's letter to the Romans, who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or the sword? Why am I mentioning this? Because often we think of hope as the reversal of fortune. Inisip po natin, hindi tayo. Siguro maraming kababayan natin inisip, pag sinabing pag-asa, ang pag-asa ay ganito, yung mga walang pera ay yayaman, yung mga pandak ay tatangkad, yung mga medyo mabigat na tulad ko ay papayat, yung mga at kung ano pang reversal of fortune. But hope is not like that. Hope is about God's abiding presence in us. In the encyclical Spes Salvi, Pope Benedict said, the Latin word consolatio expresses this beautifully. It suggests being with the other in his solitude, so that the solitude is no longer a solitude. And the one who really punctures our solitude is God, who is always with us. Of course, this is solitude in the negative sense of being isolated, but we are never alone because God is with us. And knowing that gives us consolation. But as religious, when we are also with our people, then that should also give them consolation. And we should not forget that our very own sisters, our very own brothers in our communities, we must also be with them, because it would be a shame if we are able to be with others and yet forget or neglect our very own brothers and sisters, because they too are part of God's people. Pope Francis, in his homily on Palm Sunday last year, he said, we should remember that we are not alone. Jesus experienced total abandonment in a situation he had never before experienced in order to be one with us in everything. And of course, in that quotation, that was also the favorite of St. John Paul II, do not be afraid. You are not alone. And here we recall what we saw earlier in this sharing with you in the Our Father that the first missionaries taught our people. The petition says, "Wag mo kaming iiwan nang di kami matalo ng tukso." There is nothing to be afraid because God will never abandon us. This is one of the stories of a young doctor in the Philippines, Dr. Carmina Fuentebella, who herself became, a patient of the coronavirus. And her story is really very interesting, very touching, and very important and inspiring for those who are in the medical profession, as well as for those who are now suffering from the virus or who are taking care of those who are suffering from it. And she said, I feel like the biggest source of one's mental instability in these types of situations is the thought that there is no one with you and that they don't care even if you die. But she realized, knowing that this is not true, although it may only be a little thread of hope, might be enough for you to hold out a bit longer. So that idea of hope, of the presence of God and the presence of others in us, that we are not alone, that we are not abandoned. The former Archbishop of Canterbury wrote, "I'm not going away" is one of the most important things we can ever hear. Whether we hear it from someone at our bedside in illness, or over a shared drink at a time of depression or stress, or at a moment when we wonder what's happening to our neighborhood and our society. You are not alone. I am not going away. And so, we are saved in hope. And what is hope? It is the certainty that God is truly Emmanuel, that God is with us. And if hope is communion with God, it is also union with one another, for God calls us to be one people. Sin or evil is division, and we should not forget redemption is communion. I would just like to share with you, dear brothers and sisters, as we look back with gratitude to the past, as we face the present with passion, or to live the present with passion, and as we face the future with hope, let us not forget this very important duty of every religious, and not just of superiors, and that is of vocation promotion. Often, when you are asked, who is the vocation promoter, you would point out to this brother or sister whose office is called promoter of vocation. But we should not forget, brothers and sisters, that vocation promotion is not just the promotion of new vocations or bringing new candidates into our congregations. We should realize that vocation promotion ought to be a comprehensive term that embraces both new vocations as well as the vocation of all the professed. The promotion of the vocation of all not the professed. Because our capacity to be useful to the church and to the society depends on the promotion of our vocations. That we are able to live the present with passion is actually an important aspect of the promotion of vocation, because it involves the renewal and rekindling of the vocation of everyone, of all of us, religious and Christians, as preachers of the gospel. I am sorry I have extended the time. Angel and Sister Hope told me that it should only be for 45 minutes. I have extended the time. If you allow me, I would just like to end with this little story which I learned from a good friend, Professor Robert Schreiter, many years ago. Of course, this is about Jesus walking on the water and inviting Peter, and Peter, walking over the water but sinking at a certain point when he fixed his gaze on himself and not on the Lord, and he was able to walk again when he focused and fixed his gaze on the Lord. Now, this is a story about two religious, famous theologians in those days, the Jesuit Karl Rahner and the Dominican Edward Schillebeeckx. And after a theological conference in Switzerland, they invited the Protestant theologian Rudolf Bultmann to go on fishing. Rudolf Bultmann is the one who was teaching demythologization. And what is that? Bultmann says there are really no miracles because these events could be explained in natural terms. The multiplication of the loaves, they were not physical multiplication. People brought with them baon and they just shared with it by the example of this boy who went to the Lord Jesus. So he said, these are all natural events. So Bultmann was invited by Karl and by Edward, and they went on fishing. They did not really go far from shore. So as they were fishing, after some time, Karl Rahner told them, I am getting hungry. I need to get some food. And so he excused himself. He stood up, put one foot on the water, and then the other one. And he began walking towards the shore. Edward Schillebeeckx went on fishing as though nothing extraordinary happened, but Bultmann's eyes were wide open. He could not believe it's possible. Somebody is walking over the water. After a while, Karl Rahner came back and he brought and shared some food to the two others. After a while, Edward said, Karl, you brought food. You forgot to bring some water. I am thirsty. I need to get some water. And so he excused himself. He stood up, put one foot on the water, and then the other one. And he went towards the shore. He came back and gave the two others some water. Bultmann was thinking, these Catholic boys are putting me to shame. It's possible to walk over the water. I really thought that is not possible. And so Bultmann invented a reason. And he said, you brought food, you brought drink, I need to go to the bathroom. And so Bultmann stood up, like the other two did before. He stood up, put one foot on the water, and then the other one. And then he sank. So he needed to swim towards the shore. As he was swimming, Karl Rahner looked at Edward Schillebeeckx and said, did you not tell him where the stones are? Dear brothers and sisters, as religious, in our church, in our society, I believe we can still do what seems to be impossible, walking over the water. But we can do that if we, brothers and sisters, will tell one another where the stones are. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening. And I wish you all the best, my dear brothers and sisters, on this World Day of Consecrated Life. Maraming salamat po. And may God bless us all.
Wow, Father Angel, that's really all I can say for now. Very comprehensive, very moving. Also to see how our church grew, diba? From receiving to giving, and along with it, the growth of consecrated life. And of course, there are many challenges also to us, consecrated men and women. So at this point, we will also hear the reaction and comments from our sisters and brothers in the consecrated life. In their interventions, we hope to hear not only what they thought of the presentation of Father TIMONER or Father GERARD, but more importantly, their reflections from their particular point of view.
And now, to give the first intervention from the perspective of religious bishops and priests, here we have with us is the Archbishop Emeritus of Cagayan de Oro and the Chair of the CBCP Episcopal Commission on Mutual Relations between Bishop and Religious. Let us welcome Archbishop Antonio Ledesma, S.J., D.D.
Good day, my friends, my brothers and sisters in Christ. After this wonderful presentation of Father TIMONER on the history of evangelization in the Philippines, I would like to focus on his third aspect, to embrace the future with hope. I recall the saying in our own context here in Mindanao that to be religious today is to be interreligious. And this is particularly true in our own situation in Asia, the mission area of the Philippines today. In fact, to be religious is also to be able to listen to the language not only of the natives, but also of other religions and cultures. And this is part of the challenge of being gifted to give, to share the gospel message in the context of world religions. So there are 6 dimensions I would like to present to you as a result also of our peace process in Mindanao itself. The first one, what is needed is sincerity when we enter into dialogue with people of other faiths or also dialogue among armed groups. Sincerity means honesty and truthfulness. It means that we enter into a culture of dialogue. And this is what Pope Francis tells us. To speak of a culture of encounter means that we as a people should be passionate about meeting others, seeking points of contact, building bridges, planning a project that includes everyone. Recall the word, to be passionate about meeting others. The second characteristic of the peace process and interreligious dialogue is also the element of security, that we focus on non-violence and not resort to any arms in our own exchange of views. Non-violence, again, as exemplified in one government program, from arms to farms, how to help also rebel groups to develop themselves, not by resorting to arms, but to till their farms. A third aspect is sensitivity, that we as religious especially respect other cultures and traditions. In fact, the Second Vatican Council has already mentioned this quite clearly. And let me read, I quote, "The Catholic Church rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these religions. She has a high regard for the manner of life and conduct, the precepts and doctrines, which although differing in many ways from her own teaching, nevertheless often reflect a ray of that truth which enlightens all men." So sensitivity is really also being respectful of other religions. A fourth aspect is the dimension of solidarity, that we are all brothers and sisters with one another. In fact, this is also the opening statement of the joint statement between Pope Francis and the Grand Imam in Abu Dhabi. And he says, and they say, faith leads a believer to see in the other a brother or sister to be supported and loved. And this is the same belief that believers are called to express this human fraternity by safeguarding creation and supporting all persons. The fifth dimension of interreligious dialogue and working for the peace process is spirituality. There are spirituality as consecrated men and women, the spirituality of being a true Christian or a true Muslim or a true indigenous people with one's own culture and belief. And it is in that sense that spirituality brings about a global ethic. In fact, again, we can recall the saying of the theologian Hans King, where he says, no peace among the nations without peace among the religions. No peace among the religions without dialogue between the religions. No dialogue between the religions without a global ethical standard. And no survival of our globe without a global ethic. So it is in this sense that we move on to the sixth dimension, the need for sustainability. Our vows are a way of sustaining us in consecrated life. For the world as a whole, the need for this global moral ethic is another aspect. The Declaration of Human Rights, our own dialogue encounters with world religions itself, is the beginning of this formation of a global ethic. And so it is with this that we can look and embrace the future with hope, that as religious men and women, especially here in Asia, we are called to be men and women of dialogue to bring about the love and mercy of the Lord for all of us. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Tony. And after the fathers, we will hear from the sisters. To give us the point of view of apostolic and contemplative sisters, we are joined this afternoon by Sister Nenita Divina Patenya of the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul. Magandang hapon po, Sister.
Good afternoon to everyone. Peace be with you. Thank you very much, Father TIMONER, for a very meaningful and well-prepared keynote address. I realize that you are one of the gifts that the Philippines is gifted to give to the world. 432 years after the Dominicans came to the Philippines, you are the first Filipino to be the 87th successor of Saint Dominic and the 88th Master of the Order of Preachers worldwide. What a wonderful gift you are to the world! The historical perspective that was presented in the first part of the talk resonates with our own. When the Society of Jesus came to the Philippines in 1581, that was the year when our founder, St. Vincent de Paul, was born in the south of France. 10 years later, St. Louis de Marillac was born in Paris, France. Their paths crossed each other when, in the plan of God, they would meet in 1625. That year, Louise's husband died and she was left widowed with a child, and she needed someone for a spiritual guide. This was the start of a lifelong collaboration which led to the foundation of the Company of the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, Servants of the Poor, as our congregation is known in the Catholic Church, and this was on November 29, 1633. The Company of the Daughters of Charity is a society of apostolic life in community. We do not have perpetual vows like the religious congregations. We renew our vows every year during the feast of the Annunciation of the Lord. 229 years after the foundation of the Daughters of Charity in Paris, France, the Daughters of Charity came to the Philippine shores in 1862 by the decree of Queen Isabella II of Spain. 15 Daughters of Charity left Cadiz, Spain, together with 2 Vincentian priests and 2 brothers, and sailed to Manila on April 15, 1862. It is interesting to note that they came from Cadiz, Spain, where the Dominicans also came from. The Daughters of Charity and the Vincentian priests arrived amidst the joyous welcome of the people on July 22, 1862 in Manila, about 3 months and a week at sea. As Father TIMONER was telling of the ordeal of the Spanish missionaries while they were at sea, it was almost the same account of the stories of the first Spanish sisters, almost the same experiences while at sea, and the same hardships that they endured. I believe it was their zeal for the mission and the love of Jesus that made them persevere in the journey. The motto of the Daughters of Charity, Caritas Christi Urget Nos, the charity of Jesus Christ crucified urges us, is the animating spirit in every heart of a daughter of charity and sets it on fire to hasten to the relief of every type of human misery. The second point that I found significant is to live the present with passion. As shared by Father TIMONER on the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, mercy is a heartfelt sympathy for another's distress, or affective mercy, impelling us to succor him if we can. This is effective mercy. St. Vincent de Paul in his lifetime often spoke about love is both affective and effective. Love is inventive unto infinity. Vincent told his confreres and the sisters. He, with St. Louis de Marillac, founded the Company of the Daughters of Charity as a non-cloistered society devoted to charitable works, the first in their time, because during that time the nuns were in the convent. The worldwide Vincentian family, composed of more than 200 institutes, inspired by the life and works of St. Vincent de Paul, is present in many countries all over the world. The third point is the lesson we should reflect upon as we face the need for the world of new evangelization. Just recently, from November 20 to December 8, 2020, the province of St. Louis de Marillac, Asia, had a provincial assembly. The province is composed of 9 countries: the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, China, South Korea, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Papua New Guinea. Due to travel restrictions, the assembly was held virtually in 10 locations. This is in preparation for the General Assembly, which is scheduled in the latter part of this year. Our assemblies happen only every 6 years. The General Assembly's team break through the grade, go towards encounter, challenges us also to address the points expressed in the recent encyclical of Pope Francis, Fratelli Israeli Tutti, on fraternity and sorority and social friendship. We are challenged in the way we live as community or the mystic of living together, the care for our common home, passing on the faith and the defense of human rights. The assembly documents will shape the life of every daughter of charity as we move on during the next 6 years until the next assemblies. Meanwhile, we remain heeding the words of our founders: when you give yourselves to God to serve the poor, you receive this name which God himself had given you. A few months ago, our young sisters were sent to Bongao, Tawi-Tawi, to Boracay, Samal, Davao, and Masbate. I asked one of the sisters how does she feel going amidst this pandemic. She told me that she felt scared, but her trust and hope in God gives her the courage to go. Happy Feast of the Presentation of the Lord and Happy Feast of Consecrated Persons. Today happens to be my vow day anniversary, so this morning at the Eucharistic celebration, I thank God for the gift of my DC vocation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Nitz. Now, to deliver an intervention from the point of view of our dear religious brothers, may we call on Brother Antolin Alcudia III of the Brothers of Christian Schools.
Maayong adlaw kanatong tanan. Daghang salamat AMRSP for this opportunity to share with you my thoughts about the session, A Good Man and a Good Servant in Father GERARD TIMONER. Allow me especially to focus on 2 points that he shared with us on timeless lessons of the old evangelization. The first, reflection on zeal for mission. Second is reflection on preaching in community. I remembered in one meeting with teachers 2 weeks ago, she asked me, "Ber or brother, how are you brothers coping up with the lockdown?" And the teacher further asked, "Ber, how are you dealing with the pressures of making difficult decisions this time, like letting go of some of our personnel?" As a young brother, entrusted to look after the welfare of the brothers assigned here in Ozamis, to work with my fellow brother directors in other 8 communities in looking after brothers in the Philippines, to accompany lay leaders in looking after fellow administrators, faculty, staff, students, and even parents and alumni, I just can't help but be overwhelmed by the challenges of our mission today. Given the worsening realities of the pandemic and its adverse effects to our life and ministry. But thanks to Father GERARD, he was able to remind me of the life of the early missionaries, somehow allowed me to regain my grounding as a young brother. I have many questions. He made me think of many questions on how to be zealous for mission. I ask these questions. How can I remain zealous for the mission when we are losing schools, when we are losing good teachers, when we are losing students for different reasons because of the pandemic? How can I encourage those I serve with in the ministry, like the administrators in our schools, or teachers, and even students, to remain zealous, if not excited, with the new ways we are doing today in education? How do I convince those I serve with to take a break from making modules or marking all submitted requirements? Like myself, while making this video, I'm supposed to finish checking 180 submitted requirements because I'm supposed to submit grades as soon as possible before Thursday this week. How can I encourage everyone, both religious and lay alike, to remain on fire even with all the uncertainties we face? These are the questions I ask that most of us may be asking as well. Thank you, Father GERARD, for reminding us today, once again, that our present realities have been a real story of the past, and there's so much lessons we can learn from them. On the 5th lesson you shared, preaching in community. You know what, with all the restrictions and that other realities of the pandemic, how are we as a community of religious? How are we in our respective communities? How is our present community? Kumusta ang ating mga kapatid? Kumusta kaya ang ibang congregations? Kumusta kaya ang ating mga kasama sa misyon? How are those communities with or congregations with seniors in age coping up? What can we do as communities looking after other struggling communities? Perhaps as we move forward with hope, we continue to reflect on those questions and perhaps all other questions I was not able to ask and share with you. Hope can only be sustained if we start reimagining our mission without losing sight of the lessons from the past, as pointed out by Father Gert, and the many possibilities in our mission as consecrated men and women. I end with Father Gert's reflection on vocation promotion. It's true, vocation promotion is not just the work of the young religious, but vocation promotion is for all professed, no matter what age. Perhaps we can start embracing the idea of a community of vocation promoters that embraces beyond the borders of our own congregations. Daghang salamat kayo sa inyong tanan, with Jesus in our hearts forever.
Thank you, Brother Butch. And last but not the least, representing the secular institutes in our discourse this afternoon, let us give a warm welcome to Miss Angelita Mangalindan from the Secular Institute of Notre Dame de Vie. Good afternoon, Miss Lita.
Thank you, Father Gerard, for this very informative and enriching talk. Allow me to highlight some parts which were very striking. The first part, to look at the past with gratitude, was like a revelation of the contents of a treasure box. We discovered how our greatest treasure, our faith, slowly and deeply penetrated the Filipino life, the Filipino soul. The talk has imprinted in my heart a deep gratitude to God for the gift of faith that we received through the zeal and fervor of the first missionaries. Then we learned about the power of collaboration among the early religious congregations. We are challenged to continue to create opportunities for collaboration, networking, to cultivate partnerships, to share resources. 3 weeks ago, the Asian Conference of Secular Institutes had a webinar about formation. The speakers were from different institutes in Asia. It was an experience of unity among brothers and sisters of different cultures, scattered in different places. We learned from the deep experiences of other congregations. Then we learned about enculturation as a strategy to evangelization. I was very struck by the inclusion of the translation of the Ama Namin in Tagalog and in the native Baybayin in the Doctrina Christiana of 1593. The missionaries were able to capture the soul of our country. I am reminded of what our founder, Blessed Father Marie Eugene of the Child Jesus said. Adaptation requires self-forgetfulness, self-denial, denial of personal taste and habits. One must know how to condescend. That is to reach with charity as far as the entrance of the soul. Such condescension must remain humble. We also learned how preaching in community through lifestyle and through life are effective means of teaching the faith. As for us, members of Secular Institute Notre Dame de Vie, we are called to be contemplative apostles in the world, to bear witness to the living God in our professional activities, not by discussion, but by what we are. Our goal is that others may see God in us through examples of honesty, integrity, patience, charity. We pray that we may be living tabernacles or radiant monstrances. St. Paul VI once said, "Modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if he listens to teachers, he does so because they are witnesses. There is also the importance of prayer. The contact with God is our source of strength. It serves as the jumping board for our apostolate. When we experience difficulties in the apostolate, then we are encouraged to pray more. This is the meaning of our life, to seek God, to find Him, to make contact with Him, and to give Him to others. Father Gerard also exhorted us to live the present with passion. We heard about losing the love one had at first. What happened? Perhaps mediocrity? This is something that we must fear more than anything because there is the danger of stopping on the way. The important thing is to move forward towards the goal. Yes, we may fall, but we get up and walk. Our founders would remind us, if you can't walk, crawl. It is important to renew the gift of ourselves constantly. Lastly, we were encouraged to embrace the future with hope. The young doctor's example was truly inspiring. The pandemic paved the way for greater creativity in evangelization through online masses, spiritual sessions, and catechesis. In our community, even the 70s and 80-year-olds are now using their smartphones to evangelize. To conclude this intervention, let me go back to the first part, to the history of our Christian faith. Let us honor our Blessed Mother, for she has a special place in the Philippine history. She is part of our country's heritage. We are a people in love with Mary, pueblo amante de María. Why? Because we know that her care extends to all the details of our life. She is our mother. Let us therefore surrender ourselves to her. Let us ask her to intercede for us. Let us offer her our prayers, our apostolate, and our love. She watches over us.
Thank you very much, Miss Lita and DV. And thank you too to all our reactors. Sister Happy, ikaw, what do you think is the biggest challenge for consecrated life after 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines?
As I mentioned right after the talk of Father Gert, really that from receiving to giving. We have received a lot, 500 years, and now we are really giving. And we are giving many missionaries also. And how about you, Father Angel?
I believe.
What can you say about how we should discern this process of moving forward as one body of consecrated men and women in the Philippines?
I think it's really that willingness and openness that as consecrated men and women, we are still responding, not only in the context, but with our own charism, with our own consecration, and we know what our people needs in this time. And I believe that we are really gifted, and with that gift, we can really give it not only to the church, but to all.
But the challenge also, Father Gert, like we can do, like men and women, consecrated men and women, when we work together, we can do much, or we can do many things. And I think that's the challenge to all of us.
Ayan. And I know there are people who wanted to connect with us, you know, in this time of pandemic. We are in the virtual world and we are still connected to one another. So here are some questions from the social media, and we're going to try to read it and answer them.
Yes. and really is a challenging way to end our communal reflection this afternoon. Truly a happy World Day of Consecrated Life to all of us. And I hope, Father Angel, that you were able also to have a meaningful celebration today.
Indeed, I had, Sister Happy. And despite the distance that the pandemic has created between us, technology has served to make the separation less difficult. That is why we would like to invite those who are joining us this afternoon to stay connected with AMRSP through our social media page, facebook.com/amrsp.org, where you can see regular updates on activities and announcements, as well as live broadcasts of our regular online programs.
And we also have our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com and search for AMRSP Media channel, where you can catch our weekly broadcasts of the habits, the Holy Rosary, and more contents from the Consecrated Life. While you're there, don't forget to click the subscribe button to help us reach 1,000 subscribers.
Help us also to continue our apostolate of bringing the good news and the latest in Consecrated Life online by considering donating to our social media ministry. The information on how to donate can be found on your screen.
Again, we wish to thank our keynote speaker for this conference, the Most Reverend Father GERARD Francisco TIMONER III, OP, Master of the Order of Preachers, for joining us today.
Thank you too to our panel of reactors, His Excellency the Most Reverend Antonio J. Ledesma of the Society of Jesus, Sister Nenita Divina Patena of the Daughters of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, Brother Antolin Alcudia III of the Brothers of Christian Schools, and Miss Angelita Mangalindan from the Secular Institute of Notre Dame de Vie.
We also wish to thank all of you who join us online, not only in this conference, but also in the Eucharistic celebration this morning, presided by the Apostolic Nuncio, His Excellency Charles John Brown. Your continued support and patronage strengthen our resolve to continue this apostolate.
It has been an honor for us to become your host for this afternoon's discourse. Maraming salamat and a happy World Day of Consecrated Life. I am Father Angel Cortez of the Order of Friars Minor.
Thank you for joining QUO VADIS, Lights, Shadows, and New Frontiers for consecrated men and women. Keep safe and God bless. This is Sister Happy Montecillo of the Daughters of St. Anne. And from all of us here in AMRSP,
Laudetur Jesus Christus.